Welcome back, everyone. Have another super exciting guest with me today. I have Jack Castonguay. He is an accounting professor at Hofstra University, and he is also the vice president of learning and development at Surgent. And if you're an accounting major, I'm 100% sure you're aware of Surgent and everything they do for CPA exam prep and all the other accounting learning information we put out or they put out there. So excited to have you, Dr. Castonguay. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Chayton. And to make you not say my last name repeatedly, you can just call me Jack. That works all the same.
Perfect. So, do you want to give us a little background on why you chose accounting, kind of your career direction, and then I obviously want to get into some of your hot takes and some of your big ideas on the accounting profession.
More than happy to. I actually started out as a finance and econ double major. And then I took principles of accounting and got in the high 90s when all of my friends were getting, low 80s, learning debits and credits, and said, all right, I'm pretty good at this. Switched majors to accounting, in large part because my other plan was to go to law school. And I decided I couldn't spend 7 years in college. That was going to be a little too much. Accounting was only going to be one extra year, so only 5 years. So that definitely appealed to me. That ended up backfiring a little bit because I ultimately went back and got my PhD from the University of Tennessee and ended up spending 9 years in college. So my plan to save time really didn't save me that much time. It actually cost me 2 more years. But I did that. I got my master's from James Madison. I passed all four parts of my CPA exam on the first try. I did study too much, so I did good. I did study inefficiently. How about that? Then I started working in assurance for PwC in the Richmond, Virginia office. Did that for 2 years before going back and getting my PhD. And then now I've been at Hofstra for 7 years, and Surgent, I'm about to hit my 5th year anniversary there.
Very cool. Very amazing, unique accounting journey there, getting a PhD. So why account or as you've progressed throughout your career, why have you stuck with accounting and why did you want to go and teach?
So part of the reason I wanted to go in and teach, I think that's the easy one to answer first, is uh, I love the theory behind it. I love like the policy side of it. I love being able to think through things. But for me, the actual working day to day in audit just didn't match with my personality. Um, I'm super outgoing. I'm a massive nerd. I like to read all the time. I'm constantly reading some type of article, whether it's on accounting or financial, or whether it's an economic policy piece. I read constitutional law books for fun, right? I don't think too many people do that. So I wanted kind of a job where I could continue to learn and continue to study and get paid for it. And so that was a natural transition to academia. And since being there, I think we get our CTRs, our course teacher readings, every year. And for me, I think one of the best comments I've gotten, even if students have found the class hard or they didn't like certain things that I did, is one of the feedbacks I've routinely gotten is he cares. And I think it's rare, but I think every now and then you come across professors who don't put in 100% all the time. And I never wanted that to be the case. So I wanted them to know, even if, they don't like my teaching style or that they thought some of my exams were too hard, that they thought I cared. And I think that comes across, and that's really what got me into it. What stuck with accounting is accounting, even though it moves slowly until it doesn't, right? Like some of the gap laws that you're studying right now, probably our grandparents would have studied, right? Like they would have been pretty much the same rules on how to account for, certain expenses and certain machinery. But then we also get cool stuff like we got the crypto standard that came out last year, right? ASU 2023-08. We have accounting expanding into more places like data analytics and artificial intelligence. And all these places that 20 years ago would have been foreign to an accountant, we now get to do that. And I think that's just such a cool space to be in, to where even though it's slow and it doesn't move quickly, it is constantly evolving.
I love that. That's another reason why I'm so excited about the profession, right? Is it feels like for a long time things have been very stagnant and very the same, and it feels like it may be starting, 5, 10, 15 years ago, things have started to really ramp up and become different, and hopefully are going to keep changing for the better, right? You're pretty outspoken about some of your views on what's going on in the profession right now. How do you feel about the pipeline issues that the industry's facing, and some of the other issues that the profession is kind of dealing with right now?
Yeah, I mean, the pipeline issue, it's super complex, right? So I don't think myself or anyone can sit here and say, I know exactly what's going to solve it, because we don't. And
Right.
I also don't think it's going to be just one thing, right? Like, everyone has their pet project or their niche thing they think it's going to help, and those are all good. But we don't have a silver bullet here. No one thing is going to fix the pipeline, right? It has to be multiple things, and probably multiple things at the same time. Um, and if you look at it, the pipeline issue is existential, because it's not just public accounting firms that are struggling to get people in, right? We've read articles in Accounting Today and Going Concern and other places that have mentioned where some firms are having to turn down work they would normally accept because they can't staff the jobs.
Yep.
Right? Like, that's a problem. You're seeing places where governments and localities actually can't get audits, right? They actually can't find an auditor to do their audit. So then that raises their borrowing costs, right? And then it pushes back their filings. And then if you're someone who cares about transparency, now you're not going to get if you're an investor or a citizen, you're not going to get that financial information in a timely manner, right? So that's existential. But then it trickles down, because the people who tend to work in private industry or tend to go into government, right? A lot of them historically used to start in public accounting. So if that CPA pipeline gets funneled too small, then not only do the firms not get the people they need, but all those other groups, all those other businesses, governments, not-for-profits that need accountants don't have the normal talent pool to go and draw from. So, I think the pipeline issue in the profession, even more so than trust, even more so than some of the headlines we've seen in the news, is probably the biggest issue. Now, your big question then was, what do we do about it? And again, that one's more complicated. I do think if you look at some of the studies from the CAQ and the Illinois State Society, right, they do really good work with people in the profession. We are hearing the 150 hour is a barrier, right? It is particularly a barrier for lower socioeconomic status and minority students, right? We know that. They are telling us that. So we need to find alternative pathways to get people who want to be licensed but can't get those extra 30 hours. How can we get them in? So I am a proponent of the 150 hours going away, right, as the sole requirement. If you want to leave it there and said, hey, if you have a master's, you only need 1 year of experience. But if you have an undergrad, maybe you need 2 or 3 years of experience. That's okay, right? So it's not completely stripping it away. And I think you're already seeing some programs that are 30 hours of internship credits, right? To me, the difference between a 30 hours worth of internship credits and a year of experience, why would you not just take a year of experience also?
Right.
So I think that's a problem, because I think that keeps some people from even considering accounting as a profession when they look at it and say, oh, I have to spend 5 years in school versus 4. I think one of the bigger issues that, that alone won't do it, I think firms need to raise salaries. I think that is one of the single biggest issues facing the profession. We are demanding students go to school for 5 years, pass an exam that has a 50% pass rate on average across the 4 parts. Right? So, and then by going a 5th year, you're now foregoing a year of salary. So you have that opportunity cost of staying in school.
Yep.
And we're not compensating people like you for that. And I think that's the single biggest issue, right? And one of the pushbacks I've seen on that is, well, people aren't coming into the accounting because of the image. Well, you can't disentangle salaries from the image, right? I have some friends who are in investment banking here in New York. I live in the city, right? no one wants to memorize hundreds of ratios of a company and all their sales metrics, right? And where their supply chain funnels go to. But if you're going to pay me 120,000 after 4 years of school to do that, then yeah, I'm probably going to say, you know what, that sounds good. So I think if you fix the salaries along with the work life balance, that improves the image.
Yep.
And so it has to be a multi-pronged approach. But currently, I think the barriers to entry, given the 150, and then the lower short-term payoff, right? Given the low starting salaries, because salaries do pick up, right? Once you get in that 7, 8, 9 year mark, they actually do
Oh
catch
yeah.
back up to other fields. I mean, that one we can't argue about either. But the problem is, it's hard to tell a student who's coming out with debt, right, who's trying to start their career, to say, hey, you have to wait 6, 7, 8, 9 years for this payoff. When instead of, if we just front loaded it, that would get people in, and it would probably keep people in the profession too.
Yep.
Uh, but yeah, I think salaries right now are probably the single biggest issue, and then I would funnel down. I would call work life balance closely related to salaries, because look at you, right? You and your friends and your classmates and my students, you all aren't afraid of work. Like, I hate how you all, sometimes your generation gets classified as lazy or doesn't want to work. Like, that's not what I see. I think that's a inappropriate comment, and it doesn't match the reality on the ground. I think you are smartly saying, I don't want to work for that salary. I don't want to work that many hours for that rate. And to me, that's a natural response, right? I think you all would work more hours if you were compensated for it. And I think if you fix that, I think you fix a lot of the pipeline issues that we're seeing.
Yep. So if you do the math on some of the big four salaries right now, and you simply look at it from a cost accounting perspective, right? You go and look at how many dollars you're going to make per hour at that salary. It comes close to around $20 an hour at the salaries they're paying you right now. I mean, you could go and cut lawns for that much and get your work-life balance back.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me, but you're right. It's a multi-pronged approach, and I kind of like to look at it as that we need to rebrand the entire profession, right? Like,
Yep.
you watch Friends, you watch these old TV shows or even new movies, and who do they label accountants as, right? These boring. Look at The Office, right? For all of us who have watched The Office, the accounting department is these boring people who only care about numbers and nothing else, right? And that's not the case. Look at what you're doing. Uh, Go listen to some of the episodes that I've had on
Yep.
my podcast. Like, there are people who are doing amazing and interesting things in the profession, and it can be exciting. But a lot of the professors and a lot of the professionals that have a lot of the noise and are the ones that people hear do not see that, right? It's really sad. And another point I wanted to get back to that you mentioned is, so you mentioned investment banking, right? So at my university, we have two really big clubs in the business school. We have the Pacific Consulting, which is the consulting club, and then we have what's called SIF. It's the Student Investment Fund. So you have high performing accounting students that are in one or both of these clubs, and they see all their consulting friends going off and working at Bain or working at BCG or any of these big consulting groups, and they only have to do 4 years of school, and they're making well over $100,000 a year starting out. And then you go to the investment bankers, just like you said, and they're also working crazy hours like we do during busy season, and they have a really hard job, but they're being compensated for it. So how hard is it for students to, like, see all your friends only have to get 4 years of school, be doing things that from the outside looking in look way more exciting than audit and tax, and they get to get a higher salary? Like, we have to rebrand the profession and show the cool things that accountants are doing. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to fall to the wayside to these other professions.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem because if you look at, I think it was the Wall Street Journal who had a study recently that looked at starting salaries in various business professions. And they looked at starting salaries over a 5-year period in real terms. And accounting starting salaries were actually negative in real terms, right? Now, were they still higher than some other fields? Yes, to be clear, right? The actual nominal value was higher. So you were still going to make more money, but the change over the past 5 years. So it looks like some of the other professions have kind of caught up, looked at it and said, okay, we need to entice people in. And it seems like accounting hasn't gotten there yet, right? Now, we know we can get there. We certainly can. And I want to make a point though, because you mentioned a minute about being like lawn mowing, right? You said in the first year, lawn mowing can come out to about the same on a per hour basis, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen there's been some pushback from people on higher education too, where like I can get the same starting salary without a college degree. And maybe you can, but in 5 or 10 years, now you're not going to, right?
Right.
That's spread over time. Once you hit to a certain place, even if you own your own business, whether it's lawn mowing, whether it's some other non-credentialed work, right? I'm not talking plumbers or things like that, but just some of the other side jobs that have the same starting salaries. Those do get pretty far off over time, right?
Yep.
Because you're going to earn way more as an accountant in 15 years than you would mowing lawns for the most part, right?
Right.
And that's a good thing. So we definitely need to tell people. But to your point, I don't think we can just say rebrand it because we can definitely rebrand to your point on the cooler things that we're doing outside of thinking about the image in the office or from Office Space to date myself, right? To think of the accountants as just bean pushers. And we definitely need to do that. But even if you do that and you don't fix some of the fundamental underlying issues, such as access for certain students who struggle to get the extra 30 credits, right? Such as starting salaries, you can only rebrand so much if you don't change the fundamental issues that are driving some of the branding issues.
Yep. And so from that perspective, we should make changes and use those changes as they're happening to funnel and rebrand the profession, right?
Very much so. I think that's a good way to phrase it, right? Because if you actually make changes, right? Think about I'm gonna date myself a little bit, but Domino's Pizza about a little over a decade ago, they were actually pretty bad pizza, and they actually came out and said, "Hey, our pizza, yeah, it sucks." And they had this whole branding image where they showed people's photos of them opening their pizza box, and the cheese was stuck to the roof of the box, and it looked terrible. And they're like, "We hear you. We made a bad product, but now we went through and we fixed it. And we made a better one." And they did this whole branding thing. We're like, try Domino's Pizza now and see what you think, right? Domino's stock went gangbusters after that because they made a better product. In accounting, we have to make a better product. So we have to tell students and potential students, hey, you were telling us you want these things. We have now addressed them. Come back to us. And to me, that's a great marketing pitch, right? Like, yeah, we identified the issues that you said. We hear you. And not only do we hear you, we fix them. So now we're here for you.
Yep. Domino's is an amazing story. I think we did a case study on them in one of my classes at one point. But and I think AICPA and other big organizations in the accounting world accepting those issues and seeing the faults is where the big first step happens, right? So a lot of the people I interact with and talk with on a regular basis are a part of CAS firms. So client accounting services, or there's a lot of different ways that they spell the acronym, right? Cloud accounting services,
Yep.
cloud advisory services. Is there anything you're doing in the classroom to market or show that this other side of accounting exists to students? Because I know in my experience, it's been, you can only go tax or audit, and you essentially have to go Big Four or you're not going to be successful. And part of my mission with this podcast and with what I do on LinkedIn is to show, hey, for a lot of people, Big Four is the right route. That's the good way to go to start out. But not that doesn't fit everybody's agenda or fit everybody's work-life balance capabilities, right? So is there anything you are doing in the classroom or even at Surgent to promote or show that these other avenues in accounting exist outside of just the stereotypical Big Four or tax or audit path?
Yeah. So I think a part of the reason why you've seen those stereotypical paths continue to persist is in large part is even now that is still where most of the starting jobs are, right? Like if you go on right now, again, I live in New York, and you filter accounting jobs starting, right? And then if you look at tax versus assurance versus CAS, it's probably going to be 80-20 tax and assurance. Sorry, yeah, 80 tax and assurance, 20 maybe CIS, right?
Right.
So I think a big portion for that is on average, if you were telling a student your job is going to be in blank, it's probably going to be in tax or assurance. Now, to your point, that is not for everybody. And even if you want to go into tax or assurance, the Big Four, or even if you go down to the next, large BDOs, RSMs, grants, right? That's not for everybody, right? So in that case, no, I do think we owe it to students to let them know it doesn't have to be one way or the other. Now, I will say I don't think most faculty and most people actually do tell you this is what you have to do. I think a lot of times, those firms, and I'm a former PwC alum, right? So I definitely went
Right.
that route. But those firms have large HR budgets, right? They're on campus. You see them everywhere. So I think it also does kind of, you just see them and you hear, oh, all of our friends previously went there. So I think it just kind of becomes a natural progression where people think, I have to go that route too.
Yeah.
But also to your point, no, there are other avenues, right? There are going to be a lot of students where that's going to be the perfect route for them. I'm going to go into EY, I'm going to do assurance. I'm going to go into PwC, and I'm going to do, R&D tax credits, right? But there also are a bunch of students that want the smaller firm experience, right? They want an office of 20 people and not 100 people or 1,000
Right.
people like some of the bigger offices. So I do think we need to do more on that front. But I think you're always trying to balance what other avenues do we push people towards versus what are the most opportunities available to everyone. Um, so I do think it's on both us as faculties, the firms themselves, right? Particularly those firms who run those CAS practices to let people know, hey, this is another avenue. Um, I teach a special topic seminar and I teach a technology research seminar, both at the grad level, and we cover a lot of those CIS type topics. And then you start to hear from students like, hey, that actually may be something I want to go into because it's different, right? And they're like, oh, I always thought the choice was tax or audit. Like, no, actually, no, there are other avenues. You can also go into internal audit, right? You can go work in FP&A internally at a company if you want. So there's a ton of opportunities out there. I think it's more just trying to let people know, to your point early on, hey, here are the avenues, and then you can kind of realize. But it is also hard when you don't have, most programs don't have a class on CAS, right? You always have at least a tax or class or two and an audit class. So it's hard, I think, for some people to even conceptualize what that is without ever having done it or seen it in a classroom setting.
Yep. It's that. So that's something I've experienced. I'm currently interning at a small cloud accounting firm. We do a lot of CAS, we do tax, we don't do any audits, but the experience I've had actually working at a firm outside of just the classroom, it's you always have a couple of professors that make the accounting topics really exciting and really fun. And then of course there's other classes that kind of just feel like a textbook, right? And it's I feel like it's hard for students to see how exciting some of this stuff can be just by seeing it in the classroom, right? And so being able to have this internship in CAS has completely opened my mind to what it can be, what it can look like in the future, what, just how exciting it can be. And, I want to share that with other students. That's a part of why I do everything I'm doing.
Yeah.
But you're completely right. And maybe the way that we phrase it, or the way that some universities can maybe help with this, would be the tax or audit path is what's talked about the most, right? Because that's where the job openings are. But maybe then you say, hey, a lot of schools have like a career planning or a career development seminar. Maybe in that class you can talk about the different avenues that 3, 4, 5 years after public accounting your career could look like, right? Like most FP&A roles are coming after someone has a few years in audit or has a few years of industry experience.
Yep.
um, or with tax, like you can go and do tax for individuals, or you can do tax for specifically um, SMLLCs or 1120s clients. Like being able to show the progression of accounting further than just the first couple years could really make a big difference for students, I feel like.
Very much so, right? And I think that ties in well to how we started this, to say that's also why the pipeline problem is such an issue, right? Because now you need those people who have done that a little bit of public accounting experience to go into those roles, to know that CIS exists, right?
Yep.
Um, there was a study recently that more and more firms are now outsourcing, at least temporarily, some on a longer term basis, CFO and controller roles. And a big portion of that is they can't find the internal people to do it, right? Because
Right.
they can't hire the people they want to hire because those people aren't coming out of the firms like they used to. So yeah, the opportunities abound even after, to your point, it doesn't have to be long, right? We're talking 2 or 3 years. You can change your career track. You can go into something different. You can leave tax or audit altogether, go into CAS, FP&A. But when you do that, like there has to be the spot for you, and there has to be the staff that those people can draw upon.
Yep. Yep. And so that's a whole other category I didn't even know about till I started podcasting and got on LinkedIn, was the whole fractional CFO world, and all these people that have built practices and firms just all around the fractional CFO work.
Yep.
There's all these hype and exciting positions in accounting, and we're not marketing them good enough. It's yeah, it's tough for me. You know, I go into class and I'm talking to my friends before, intermediate accounting 2 starts, and I'm like, yeah, I just talked to this guy who's a fractional CFO, and everyone turns around and looks at me. They're like, what the heck is a fractional CFO?
No, and,
So,
and, and you're like, give me 5 minutes, right? I mean, and I will say that is something I think AICPA does really well on. Like when you listen to almost anyone there talk, particularly those that understand the exam side of the business too, right? Meaning they're more closely connected to the students. You will hear them go over, if you talk to any of their higher ups, they can list off all these roles, all these positions that are hungering for CPAs, right? And that have good revenue opportunities for us as CPAs. And now it's just getting people into the roles to do that. I think they
yep.
do a great job of that. But now it's like, okay, how do we let people, to your point, who are in intermediate 1 or shoot, who are a freshman, undecided business major, how do I let them know that, yeah, these tax and audit things exist, but there's all these other pathways to where you can kind of, I was joking with a friend the other day. I was like, accounting can kind of be a choose your own adventure. Right?
Yep.
You can start in one path. You can change up, go into another one. You can take what you learn there and go into something else, right? You can do fractional CFO work and then maybe go into litigation consulting, right? Because you probably
Yep.
came across that as a fractional CFO. So, and I think the biggest thing that we don't talk about enough in the profession, I was talking to my friend, I think he is Sean Steinsmith at Lehman.
Okay.
He's a professor there. And we were talking about, you have such an opportunity as an accountant to be your own boss early on, right? Like we always talk about these entrepreneurial classes. You can start your own firm and your own practice before you're 30, right? And like the average startup CEO or founder, I think is like 45, 46, right? So now we're talking a full decade and a half ahead of what we think of as a young startup CEO. And we have the opportunity as accountants and CPAs to get into our own business at such an early age. There's not many other fields where you can do that at scale, and we can do it at scale.
It's so I'm a huge entrepreneur at heart. That's originally why I studied accounting. I didn't even want to be an accountant. I just wanted the hard skills that an accountant has to be able to run my own business. Well, come to find out, accounting is like the perfect business to start right now because of the immense need for our services. And just like you said, you can start your own business very early on. In my mind, there's not a better, if you're an entrepreneur, and even if you hate accounting, but you drag through the schoolwork and the work, there's not a better business to start where you can go from being solely on the work and doing the accounting to actually managing the business, being in sales,
Yep.
interacting with your clients like 2 to 3 years after starting your business. And it just, it blows my mind that people are just looking over this, right? You have, what is it, close to 70% of AI CPA members are at or close to retirement age. And where are all those clients going to go? Like, they got to
Exactly.
go somewhere. They have to get compliance work done. Businesses have to get bookkeeping done. and
Yep.
and there's going to be a lot of people that are really bad at doing it. And so if you're really good at what you do and you're really good with people, you're going to make an impact day one.
And you have so many opportunities, right? I mean, you just went through a good amount of them. And to your point, luckily we have these nice compliance, whether there's laws, regulations, bank covenants, etc., that kind of make our business like that kind of give us a pretty high floor for how much need there's going to be, right?
Yep.
Because a bank's not going to give you a loan if you don't have at least normally a review, right? Maybe not always an audit, but a review, right? Um, Tax debt is one of the only debts you can go to jail for, right? You don't pay your taxes, they can put you in jail, right?
Yep.
So when you think taxes, audits, reviews, those assurance services, those statements you have to file to either get money or to make sure you pay the right amount of money to state, local, federal governments. In that case, yeah, we have a set amount of work that always has to be done. And we need the people to do that set amount of work. And there's so many opportunities to where if you're to your point, if you put in the work and you're good at it, you can kind of punch your own ticket.
Yep. I do not see a better opportunity in all of the business world right now than in accounting. And you've mentioned it several times here in our conversation up to this point. As exciting as investment banking and consulting are, you can do some of those same things for your clients as an accounting firm owner, and you can end up making more than they are and work for yourself at the same time. It is like the best combination of both worlds. Like, I'm I'm the finance lead on our school's consulting team right now, and the advisory and finance stuff that I'm doing in the consulting club right now is some of the same things I'll be able to do for some of my own clients someday. Because yes, accountants get to do advisory work, not just compliance.
Yep. Yeah, it is the best kept secret in the profession that we're not putting out there, right? Like we should be telling everyone this is the opportunity set that you have because to me, and it seems like, I see you smiling as you're saying it, right? Like that's some of the exciting stuff, right? Now, yeah, do you have to have the fundamentals in the background to get there? Yes, but you don't need forever to figure those out, right? You need some work experience to where you applied what you did in the classroom, to where you start to see, okay, here's what it was in theory versus here's what it is in practice. But that doesn't take forever. That takes a couple years, and then you're ready to go do all these other things that you're talking about, right?
Right.
And having your CPA opens you up to be able to do that because then you can do, you know, particularly if you're not doing SEC audits, which you're not going to be doing SEC audits on your own, so don't have to worry about that one, right? If you're not doing SEC audits, you can do a bunch of other services for multiple clients.
Yep, it really is amazing. I mean, so even just so take tax for example. Tax gets such a bad rap that it's so boring. It's just data entry. It's it's this, it's that. Uh Take tax planning for example. You get to go back and look at the historical data of this individual or this business and try and find ways to save them money on their taxes. And then, even if you can't find anything in the past that could be fixed or amended to save them more money, you get to start planning and working in the future on helping them make smart financial decisions that can help them save money. And like the looks and the faces that clients make when you tell them, "Hey, we saved you this much money," or "We found this," it's amazing. Like, you can be a people person and still be an accountant.
Who knew? Right? And no, and to your point, I mean, I think most people, when they think tax, they only think of the taxes that they experience in their life, right? And what is the tax experience that most of us do? We, again, by law, have to file our tax return every year. So
Right.
they hear tax and go, this is what tax accountants are doing. That is what some tax accountants are doing, right? But you have tax accountants that are doing R&D research, right? You have tax accountants that are doing essentially financial planning, right? Hey, here's the investment vehicle that's going to save you the most on taxes over the period, and will allow you to keep your most returns when you retire at 60, 65, right? People
Yep.
don't realize that's a tax accountant, right? Or, hey, you want to buy this second home. How do I restructure your first mortgage, if you have one, to where you can do that, right, and still get the most benefit to you? That's an accountant. It's not just filling out a 1040, which everyone's like, oh, I do that every year. That's what an accountant does. And that's just not what a tax accountant does. Even as someone who was on the assurance side of the business, I know that's not what most tax accountants do.
Yep. And even just in the real estate space, there is so much work that accountants do behind the scenes to help investors and families save money on their taxes. It's just, there are so many avenues in every part of accounting that are just not mentioned enough in my mind. We got to get this stuff out to students. They need to know, because it's so exciting.
Very much so. And again, like we've covered so many just random opportunities just going back and forth here that kind of lets you know that, to your point when you started this, the list isn't just tax and assurance, right? Like, the list is everything we've talked about and probably 40 other things that we haven't even mentioned.
Yep, exactly. Well, Jack, so just a couple more things before we finish up here. So, with being the vice president of learning and development at Surgent, what are some of the things you're doing there, and how important is it that students are using? I know you're biased towards Surgent, but things like Surgent or Becker, or there's a million other names, or not a million, but
Sure.
hundreds of other names out there that you can use to study for your CPA or EA exams, or um, even the CMA now, which is
Yep.
getting more names. How important is it that students are using some of those resources to be ready for their exams?
I'll speak on average. For most students, you need some type of review provider, right? And that's strictly for two reasons. Let's take the CPA, since that's the main path, but you can apply it to EA too, right? One, it is almost impossible for a college curriculum to cover every topic in depth the way the CPA exam does, right? Those blueprints across all four, now 6 parts, there's 60, 70 pages. There's a lot of
Right.
topics. I take some things like governmental accounting, for example. Some schools have a course on it. Other schools don't cover it, right? Some schools only have advanced accounting in their MAC program. Other schools have it in undergrad. So depending on your background, there's some things you may have not gotten exposure to, or you may have not gotten exposure to at the same depth you would otherwise.
Right.
And then the biggest thing, though, I think with any review providers, again, I'm biased, I am at Surgent, but any of them is you see the way the questions are worded on the exam, right? Because part of passing the exam is knowing the content. That is probably the largest part, don't get me wrong. But the other part is knowing how to recognize the content in the way that they're going to ask you. Because it may not have been the way you saw it on your internship, in your classes, right? Whether you've worked or not. And knowing how they're going to phrase certain questions and where they may try and trip you up, that I think is the single biggest thing that takes you, if you're at a 70, at an 80, right? With a 75 being the
Right.
passing. Because
Right.
even if it helps you for 5 points, when you think about how much it costs to take the exam, right? We're talking $200 to $300 per part every time you take it. Like for me, yeah, I told you I overstudied for the CPA exam. I'm not a fan of leaving things to chance. I wanted to take that thing one time and one time only. So, I used a review provider, I put in the study time, and I still tell all my students, if you can, that's the route to go. And luckily, most firms pay for it, right?
Right.
Most firms, if you're going to an accounting firm, will reimburse you for your services. Because again, I just don't think you want to leave it to chance.
Right.
Um, I think on the other Surgent side, the coolest things we're doing now is we have a Power BI series. We have a data analytics with DAX series. We are looking at expanding into some RPA type work. So we're doing things that, again, I would consider non-traditional accounting, but that's where we're starting to see some demand. And as people like you are coming into the profession, you're like, hey, I learned how to use this thing in undergrad. How do I apply it on the job? Right? You have people like me who's like, what is Alteryx, right? But no, actually now I know what it is. But when they first announced it, I was like, I don't know what this thing is. I never came across that. But now we use it, right? We use it in our classes at
Right.
Hofstra, and we're trying to find ways to incorporate it on the CPE side at Surgent as well. But it's just meeting customers and CPAs where they are. If they're like, I want to learn how to use the tool, then we want to offer you the way to study, to apply that tool to where you can then go into to kind of what we've been talking about this whole time is go help your clients, right? Use this tool to help your clients either save money, do something better, because at the end of the day, no matter what side of the business we're in, we are in client service, regardless of who our client is.
Yep. Yep. It's got to be all about our teams first, and obviously the clients. Super super important. Well, Jack, thank you so much for all of your knowledge. I really appreciate, like I said at the beginning, everything you're posting and sharing, and even getting in the classroom. You're really making a difference by being in the classroom, and I really appreciate you doing that. Do you have any? You have one piece of advice that you could give to accounting students, young accounting professionals? Uh, your biggest piece of advice that they should take away from today's episode.
For my senior classes, I do this also on the last class of the year. Um, and I tell them to follow the rule of 33, right? So 0.33. Because if you think about it, if you sleep 8 hours a day, if you work 8 hours a day, that gives you 8 hours to do the rest of your life, right? So no matter what you're doing, you have to do something that you're going to enjoy for that 1/3 of your total life. And if you put that into the time you sleep, if you take that out, that's 50% of your life is work, right? So you have to go into some type of field where you're going to actually not just tolerate it, but actually enjoy being there and enjoy doing it. And I think that is one of the most important pieces of advice that people kind of lose track of because they realize, oh, it's only this, so it's only 9 to 5. But yeah, I care about accounting. I'm still in the profession, right? Jesus, 13 years after going into it to begin with, right? Because I actually enjoy what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. And that's
Yeah.
1/3 of my life and a half of my waking life. So any students looking at it, just ask yourself, where would I be happiest? Because you want to do something you actually care about. It doesn't have to be the thing you care the most about, right? Maybe you have a pet project or you care something, you're really interested in charity work or climate change. You can still do some of that, but it has to be over, on the scale of 1 to 3, 1, 2, and 3. It has to be at least a 2 or above. Otherwise, you probably need to evaluate and look at some of these other paths that we've talked about.
Yep. I love that. I've never heard that rule before. So I appreciate you sharing that with me, and I think that's incredibly valuable advice. So if my listeners want to find you, where's the best place? Is the best place to find you on LinkedIn? Do you have any other places where people can find your content or find what you're sharing?
LinkedIn's probably the easiest right now. I'm also on Instagram as Professor PROF Jack C as well. I got off of X a little while ago, but I did used to have an active track there as well. But LinkedIn's probably the best one for right now.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. You've given us some amazing knowledge, and really appreciate some of your takes and your expertise on what's going on in the accounting industry right now. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for listening. Jack, if you'll hang on for a second.
Sure.